I'm adding shingles and other details to an HO scale craftsman kit on Ron's Trains and Things right now. Hi, I'm Ron of Ron's Trains and Things, and if you'd like to see more model railroad tips, tools, and techniques, then be sure to subscribe down below and click that little bell icon so you can catch future videos. I've been building an HO scale craftsman kit from Mind Mount Models in preparation for an HO scale module that I'm planning to build for a variety of videos on this channel, as well as just to branch out in my own model railroading experience. Well, today I am adding shingles and rooftop details and weathering to that kit, and I'm going to tell you I'm very excited about this process and these details. I think they're going to look fantastic. Now, I want to encourage you to watch this video all the way to the end because I've got a special offer for you from Mind Mount Models, and you're going to want to check that out. So be sure and listen for that at the end of this video. Well, enough talk. Let's head over to the workbench and get the shingles, details, and weathering underway. Very excited to see how this turns out. Check out our sponsor, Midwest Model Railroad. With some of the best prices and customer service in the business, they're your one-stop model railroad shop. MidwestModelRR.com. Link in the description. The structure I'm working on is Randy's Auto Repair. My basic structure is complete, but it lacks shingles, weathering, and other details. The kit comes with some cast metal detail parts, including an exhaust fan vent, a cyclone vent for the roof, and a plumbing vent pipe. It also comes with a chimney, which I'm not using on my model. I filed the flash off of the detail parts, and the exhaust fan vent took some filing to get a smooth end for mounting. I weathered these parts by dipping them in Monroe Models weathering washes. For the exhaust vent, I used rusty brown, and for the roof vents, I used ash gray. I let these dry completely, then dipped the roof vents a second time to get a good coverage. I drilled mounting holes for the roof vents using a pin vise. The roof material is a compressed, tempered wood material similar to hardboard, so drilling by hand takes some patience. I mounted the vents using medium viscosity or gap-filling CA. It turned out that my hole for the cyclone vent was slightly too large, but this was repairable. I glued the vent to the lower edge of the hole with CA and used a clamp made from a small modified clothespin to hold it in place while it dried. I then glued the plumbing vent in place in the same way. When the glue on the cyclone vent had set, I used the CA to fill the gap around the vent. It took a couple of applications to fill the space completely, but the gap-filling CA works just as advertised. When both vents were secured, I added a bit of CA from below to add strength. I glued the exhaust vent above the rear window of the garage section of the structure per the photos with the model. I also used CA to attach this detail part, adding a bit of accelerator to make it set up quickly. Next, it was time to turn to the shingles. The laser-cut shingles are made of an even thinner variant of the compressed tempered wood that was used on the roof. The shingles have to be painted. I used painter's tape to attach the shingles to a piece of paper for painting so the paint wouldn't bleed through the gaps of the shingles and get on my work surface. In hindsight, I do not recommend this. Enough paint bled through the shingles that they stuck to the paper, and I had to carefully scrape the paper off of the back of the shingles with a hobby knife blade. I recommend painting over a paper towel and moving the shingles often to keep this from happening. I started by painting the shingles with a general coat of polyscale roof brown. I didn't worry about thin spots in the paint, as variation in the color is going to be important to the effect of the shingles. When painting the shingles, use brush strokes that go up and down the shingle tabs, not across. This will be important in the subsequent paint steps as well. The shingles will be applied in rows, so it's most important to vary the shingles from one tab to the next. Shingles that are across from one another in the carrier sheet will not be when applied, so variation from one row to the next is not so important. When the roof brown had completely dried, I dry brushed the shingles in uneven streaks with boxcar red, burnt umber, and light gray paint to create uneven coloration and streaks of the composite shingles. I was not trying to weather the shingles at this point, just to create the natural variation in color that would be on the shingles. Weathering will come after the shingles are applied. The shingles can be adhered to the roof with glue, but the instructions recommended using double-sided tape. A tape with a protective strip on top is best, as you won't be sticking your fingers to it as you apply the shingles, and you can expose each strip of tape just as you need it. I trimmed each strip of tape even with the roof edge as I applied it. Throughout the roofing process, working the valleys of the roof is a most challenging part. Take extra care here, as a well-done valley will make or break the look of your roof overall. I trimmed the tape down to the very bottom of the valley to create a smooth transition. Work carefully to cut the tape as close around the roof vents without damaging the vents. The best way to do this is to slit the tape at the center of the vent, lay the strip of tape down so it is positioned correctly, then use a sharp number 11 blade to trim the tape around the curve of the vent pipe on each side of the slit. Continue this process of laying the tape until all of the roof sections are covered with tape. I began laying the shingles on the long main roof at the front of the structure. I removed the protective strip from the first row of tape. Positioning is most important for getting a realistic look to the shingles. This means first alternating the valleys between the individual shingle tabs by half a tab on each row. It also means lining each row of tabs up straight and evenly along the tops of the valleys of the previous row, so that the single rows remain parallel to one another as well as to the ridge of the roof. The first row of shingles I lined up so that they just overhung the roof edge, so a full tab lined up with the flush end of the roof. The next row starts within the middle of a tab, lining up with the end of the roof. It took a few courses for me to figure out the best way to trim the ends of the shingles. It turned out that scissors work best. To help the illusion of the variation, I took each successive row of shingles from a different part of the carrier sheet. When trimming the shingles, do not throw any of the parts away. Short sections of shingles can be used on short sections of roof, and very small sections or individual tabs will be used later on the ridge row. When I reached the bottom of the first valley, I had to figure out the best way to cut the shingles into the valley. Roof valleys are built in two different ways. An open valley uses a finished piece of metal flashing in the bottom of the valley, and the shingles are cut to overlap the flashing but come short of the bottom of the valley. A laced valley, on the other hand, lines the valley with flashing but covers the flashing entirely by weaving the courses of shingles from the two roof lines together into a continuous shingle cover. It would be easy to model an open valley by placing a painted piece of paper in the valley and cutting the shingles to just overlap the edges of the paper. I preferred to try to simulate a laced valley. I couldn't truly lace the shingles as they are far too thick and stiff to allow this to work, so I cut them tight into the valley, hoping to create the illusion of a woven valley. The effect did not come out perfect, but I think it came out looking pretty good. With all of that said, I experimented back and forth with trimming the shingles in the valley on the roof with a hobby knife and with cutting the angle with scissors before applying the shingles. The shingles are hard to cut on the roof, and care has to be taken not to damage the roof or the structure when doing so. But cutting the angle in advance is a challenge to make sure that the angle is placed correctly so that the offset tabs are kept in the right place. I kept alternating back and forth between the two methods throughout the process. When working around the roof vents, I cut the course of shingles at the nearest full tab to the vent, cut just the tab part of the shingle to fit below the vent, then continued full shingles beyond the vent. On the next course, I trimmed the bottom of the tabs around the vent as close as possible. If too much gap is left, some oily black paint can be applied to simulate pitch, which is often used to seal around such vents. Laying the shingles on the short sections next to the valleys is a bit of a tedious process. Take extra care to align these courses of shingles as much as possible with those of the previous layered section for the best looking results. The top row on each roof section will have to be trimmed long ways just above the tab valleys to fit on the top of the ridge. I found it helpful to add a touch of wood glue to the end of these top rows to ensure proper adhesion. Continue laying the shingles using the same process until all of the roof sections are covered. The last section of roof, along the garage section, was the easiest as each end of the roof is straight. Simply align the shingles, stick them down, and trim off each end. Now it was time to use all of those small pieces of shingles that we saved to create the ridge row. The instructions called for using 2 tabs for each ridge piece, but I thought this looked oversized, so I decided to use single tabs. This is where my experience as an N-scaler came in handy, as these tabs are quite small and this process somewhat tedious. I cut a single tab of a shingle, picked it up with tweezers, aligning the middle of the tab with the edge of the tweezers, and folded it in half. I used wood glue to attach these tabs to the ridge line of the roof, overlapping each one halfway over the previous one. This looks quite tedious, but once I got rolling, the process went surprisingly quickly. On the garage section, I worked from front to back. On the main roof section, I started at the joint with the garage and worked across the roof. With the shingles finished, it was time to turn to the final detail, the roof sign. The instructions included this scale template to help cut the supplied scale lumber to length at the proper angles. The billboard support structure uses a combination of 1/16 inch square stock and 1/16 by 1/32 inch stock. I cut each piece to length. I then used some India ink wash to stain and age the lumber. I dabbed off the excess stain and left them to dry. Most of the pieces came out a little lighter than I expected, so they got a second bath in the wash. When these pieces had thoroughly dried, I began assembling the structure. I started with the support leg assemblies. I used the template to align the pieces and to cut the angles needed. I glued the pieces together with wood glue and applied one of the braces, holding everything together for a moment until the glue tacked enough to hold the assembly in place as I set it aside. I repeated this process for all 3 leg assemblies. After the glue had partly dried, I turned the legs over and applied the brace on the other side of each one. Next, I installed the mounting boards to the leg assemblies. The template shows the structure from the front, so I had to do a bit of adjusting to the placement as these mounting boards are different lengths and are not centered on the legs. As I installed the outside legs, I used machinist blocks to hold everything in place and square. After this glue had dried, I applied the 2 braces to the back of the support. Finally, it was time to turn to the very delicate sign. I carefully cut it from the carrier sheet. I trimmed the tabs carefully with a sharp knife, as sanding didn't seem possible on such a delicate piece. I painted the sign per the pictures supplied. For this, you will need thin hobby paint and a very fine brush. The compressed wood drinks up the paint, so 2 or 3 coats are needed to cover well. I left my paint with a bit of a faded look intentionally to leave it weathered without actually weathering the sign. For the red, I used Polyscale Caboose Red. The yellow parts are painted with Tamiya Flat Yellow. And finally, the gray parts are painted with Model Master's Light Sea Gray. When the paint had dried, I applied the sign to the support structure. I held the sign in place and applied bits of wood glue to the connection points. This is a bit of a challenge as the connection points are quite fine, but I did the best I could and then scraped away any excess glue with my hobby knife when the sign was attached. I positioned the sign on the roof for fit, and then glued the 2 mounting timbers in place on the roof. They fit in the front of the main legs and in front of the rear braces. Before installing the sign, I marked lightly the position of each of these legs and weathered the structure. I did all of the weathering with Monroe weathering powders, formerly known as AIM weathering powders. I started by applying a general medium gray coat. For this, I mixed medium gray and white powders together until I got the color that I wanted. This serves as a bit of a fade coat and blends the coloring of the shingles together. I applied this coat with a stiff brush with upward strokes, as I wanted more of the color on the bottom edges of the shingles to show weather wear. Next, I used some straight medium gray powder to add streaks along and below the sign mounting timbers, below the roof vents, in the bottom of the valleys, and a few other random spots. I highlighted the weathering with some dark rust below the vents and some medium earth below some of the sign legs. With all of these weathering powders, a little goes a long way, so start very sparingly and build the color up slowly. Finally, I used a bit of the rust color around the exhaust vent in the rear, and some medium gray to simulate areas where water washed down the walls, especially where the water would run off the roof. Note that the kit does not come with gutters, and I did not add them. Finally, I added some medium earth to simulate mud splash along the bottom of the walls in certain places and on the thresholds of the doors. When I was satisfied with the weathering, I glued the roof sign in place. And with that, the structure is complete. I'll add more details when the structure is added to my diorama, including stoops at the doors, a steel parts rack on the end of the building, barrels, trash cans, and the like. I must say that this kit was a lot of fun to build, and I look forward to building more Craftsman kits for mine mount models in the future. Well, I must say that I am very pleased with the way this Craftsman kit from Mind Mount Models turned out. It was a lot of fun to build. I haven't done a lot of work in HO scale for many, many years, and I've discovered that all of my work in N-scale has really given me an attention to minute detail that I think really makes my HO scale work come out looking really, really good. And I'm excited about doing more of that as I continue to build this diorama, this module in HO scale. Watch for more of those videos coming up. Now, if you enjoyed watching me detail this structure, you'll want to see how I built the structure as well, and you can find that in a video in a link in the corner of your screen right now. Now, I told you that I had something special at the end of this video from the folks at Mind Mount Models, and here it is. Through the month of December, they're offering Ron's Trains and Things viewer a 10% discount on their Craftsman kits at Mind Mount Models, simply by using the promo code RTNT10. Now, that's not an affiliate link for me. I get nothing from that, but you get a 10% discount just for going to Mind Mount Models and buying one of their kits and using that promo code when you do. You're going to find a link to Mind Mount Models website as well as this promo code in the top of the description down below. And while you're down in the description, you may also want to check out my Amazon page and my Amazon pick of the week and tons of other great links down there that I know that you'll enjoy and benefit from as well. Well, if you'd like some more Model Railroad content right now, check out the links on your screen. And be sure and join me each Tuesday as I bring you even more great Model Railroad videos. And I look forward to seeing you then.
10, Lizzie?